Private and local order of the day, number 1.
South Taranaki District Council Cold Creek Rural Water Supply Bill, third reading.
I call the Honourable Minister, Chester Burrows.
Mr Speaker, I move that the South Taranaki District Council Cold Creek Rural Water Supply Bill now be read a third time. Mr Speaker, it's my privilege to have been the sponsoring MP as the local Member of Parliament for South Taranaki, for Wanganui, including the South Taranaki District Council area, to bring that local bill before the House. And I recognise that it is a bill that has had its controversy over the passage of the Select Committee stages particularly, and I recognise the various positions taken by parties in the House. I recognise too that they are divergent, and in some ways some parties were never going to vote for this particular bill and others always were. I acknowledge the spirit of cooperation, understanding that pervaded the Local Government Environment Select Committee during the course of listening to the evidence. But most of all today I congratulate those members of the community around Tikuri in the Opunaki area who years ago saw the opportunity to lift production on their farms to secure a viable and potable water supply for their homes, for their stock, and took advantage of a scheme that existed at the time under the government to be able to get a dollar-for-dollar subsidy from taxpayers provided they met certain production increases. It was at a time in New Zealand that some members will remember where interest rates were incredibly high and penalty rates for late payments were even higher. It was not unusual for young farmers getting started in that particular area to be paying up to 22% in penalty rates and a normal mortgage rate of about 18% in order to buy their farms or their stock or to get working capital for those farms. And so they invested in this Cold Creek water supply scheme, and in doing so they raised the production on those farms many-fold. Today it services about 300 plus consumers, and by a previous piece of legislation passed in the early 2000s, because the scheme was potable, there was a limit on, there was a restriction on the ability for the South Taranaki District Council to vest the scheme back with those who had built it and maintained it and paid for it because of the fact that it was potable. Other schemes locally which weren't potable were able to be vested back. And so it was recognised very early on that there was going to be need to be a local bill for this to be able to happen. Looking back over that period of time, it's interesting to note the changes that have been made in respect of, for instance, one of the issues that arose in consultation with iwi. The local district council, the South Taranaki District Council, has an iwi liaison committee, and on it are a number of representatives of local iwi. And they truly felt that they were doing the right thing by consulting in consulting with iwi via this iwi liaison committee, and expected the representatives on that committee from the local iwi would take the issues back to iwi, they would be discussed and then their views brought forward through this particular forum. As was raised by iwi during the course of the Select Committee process, they did not consider that to be consultation. And this far down the track, maybe over 10 years after more than 10 years after the instigation of this vesting process, I don't believe that any district council would leave such divestment of an asset over to be done in that particular way. However, I think everybody accepts that they did so in good faith at the time. Iwi's position is that locally we are still going through the settlement of their assets, and so no assets should be sold until that process had been finished with the Crown. They also have an issue around their place as treaty partners with the Crown, and whether they should actually be dealing with the District Council or whether they should be sitting with the Crown and deciding the distribution of water rights, at the moment delegated to the Taranaki Regional Council. These are principled positions, and they are well understood by both the consumers and the owners of the water supply and the South Taranaki District Council. However, there hasn't been a meeting of the minds there, albeit the Select Committee process was put on hold in order to be able to get around the table with the representatives and to understand where each of them are. It is important to note too that the local people constructing the water scheme hooked onto the water scheme without any charge a number of local amenities, including local marae, the schools and the community halls and other facilities that were community owned and operated without any charge whatsoever, albeit, as I said earlier, it was a time of great financial stress. The buy-in for those schools and halls and marae and also included the ability of the local Opunaki township to be able to hook on in emergency circumstances to the Cold Creek scheme. There had been an issue for some years that problems on the slopes of Taranaki meant that in heavy rainfall the water supply to Opunaki township wasn't potable and wasn't safe. It meant that water had to be delivered to local homes, and by the quick institution of a branch from the Cold Creek scheme meant that local Opunaki residents were able to access clean and potable water straight off the Cold Creek scheme. And by agreement, that facility exists today and will continue on into the future, albeit it's no longer required because the South Taranaki District Council has spent a lot of money in ensuring the constant water quality for Opunaki residents. I guess the question then asked about, well, who paid for it? And this is a question that's been debated around the Select Committee and around this debating chamber for some time. The point is made that the mainly farmers put up the money for building the construction of the scheme and actually built the scheme themselves. There was a dollar for dollar taxpayer subsidy, not ratepayer but taxpayer subsidy, which went with that, as I said earlier, on the condition that production was lifted as a result of the scheme, and that has happened many times over, and so the taxpayer has been repaid many times over by the increase in tax that was taken from these more successful businesses, mainly dairy farms. There was a period of time when the South Taranaki District Council serviced the Cold Creek scheme by way of some monitoring, and when they were challenged to find a single cent that hadn't been covered by repayments from the Cold Creek operators back to the council, it was suggested that there was some time when inspections were done when they weren't charged for diesel or travel costs. And that was the only money, although it couldn't be quantified, that could possibly not have been covered by the Cold Creek scheme. It's important to note that even during the discourse over the last decade or so between the council and the Cold Creek consumers, that every expense the council has gone to, including legal fees in contention with the points being made by the consumers, were paid for in fact by the consumers. And so in fact we're able to say today that we can't establish any or quantify any money whatsoever that would be outstanding to the South Taranaki District ratepayers. I want to just cover off before I finish a point that was raised by New Zealand First, who put up a supplementary order paper suggesting there should be a referendum across the Taranaki District Council-wide constituency, and in the event that that didn't pass, they would not be voting for the bill in spite of an order assurance that they would be. The point remains that the initial ownership of this scheme, legal ownership of this scheme, was vested in the Egmont Plains County Council, which later was amalgamated into the South Taranaki District Council. If that SOP had passed, then the referendum would have been held from all constituents from Okato, which is about 20 minutes south of New Plymouth, all the way down to Maxwell, which is about 20 minutes south of Wanganui, albeit those people largely have absolutely no interest in this. It's important finally to mention that this is about the vestment of pipes and concrete on 1 acre or so of ground in rural Taranaki. I'm very pleased that we've reached this point today. I commend this bill to the House and look forward to its passing, given the intimations from other parties of support that it will have across the House. Thank you.
I call the honourable member Andrew Little.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, I rise to speak in this third reading debate on the South Taranaki District Council Cold Creek Rural Water Supply, and I acknowledge my colleague Chester Borrows, and I disagree with him on at least one point, and that is that when he says that he is just the sponsor of this bill, I want to correct the record and say Mr Borrows is more than just a sponsor. He is not some sort of passive champion of this cause. He has played an active role both before this bill arrived in this House and ever since. And his role started with going along with his colleague Shane Ardern and Mr Ardern's brother and heavying the South